How's the audio? Audio good? Perfect. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for coming up to hear me talk. Don't know if I have that much to say, but hopefully it's something interesting. My name's David. I'm from Sony. I'm with our pro support group. I'm based here in the DC area. And hopefully today we're going to go through a rundown of sort of an overview of a variety of Sony technologies that have sort of found their way throughout the lineup into almost all of our cameras of the current generation or just some of the most current tech. So not a complete slide, but a good look at our current cinema line. So the cinema line has expanded since we've produced this. You know, we've recently introduced the Burano, which we have to show downstairs. So a very complete package of higher end cinema cameras that have taken their technology from our Alpha line, because what we've seen across the industry is this giant shift from DSLRs into mirrorless in these smaller consumer cameras. And this mirrorless camera, the technology has shifted into full frame because we want that depth of field and the image quality that men have become to demand. And that same technology is what we've seen brought into the cinema line, the FX3, FX6, FX9, the Venice, the Burano, the Venice 2. The full frame is absolutely where the demand is across the industry, not just for low light image quality, but that depth of field and that unique look. So everything from the smallest camera to the biggest camera is incredibly related now. So some of that technology is very much in-house developed by Sony so that we can deliver the performance that you're expecting. So everything that starts from the lenses all the way through the body. Sony is developing our own lens lineup, our own lens system, so we can deliver that accurate autofocus, extremely fast autofocus, smooth transitions when we're recording for video, and the same performance for stills, so that we have incredibly new autofocus motors. Those lens actuators have been designed by Sony to be a unique tool. Different than the actuators used in older stepping motors or things that would rotate lens elements, we're actually doing what we call linear autofocus. We are moving smaller elements in the back of the lens direct straight back and forth because that's the closest distance between 2 points rather than rotating a huge lens element, so that we can move stuff faster. We have new cameras that are shooting 120 frames per second. We want to be able to autofocus and keep up with that. So we've redesigned the lens motors. Of course, Sony is an imaging sensor company, Sony Semiconductor. We have done a ton of R&D to develop the sensors all the way through the processor that's handling that, improved resolution of viewfinders, body chassis is extremely light, dust and weather sealed. So I've put this processor up here. This is not going to be something that's in every single camera. We're seeing this across the line in most of our higher end tools. FX6 uses this processor, Alpha 7S3, FX3, the new Alpha 9 Mark III. It's our Bionz XR processor that is significantly faster if you've used any of the current cameras and seen how quick that they are snappy when you move through the menus, or when you jump from recording to stop recording and how quick that they can handle that data, or being able to shoot 4K 120 and have it not slow down or overheat right away, to be able to handle that type of data. That's what this processor is pushing us through. Now this is very particular to most of the Alpha lineup, right? A variety of sensors. Not every camera is the same. Different tools for the job. But there's different side effects of this, right? So like our Alpha 7S3, the FX3, they use the same sensor. It's that 12 megapixel sensor delivering incredible results in low light because we don't have a ton of pixels, right? If I have 12 million pixels in the same space that I put 61 million pixels, each pixel is significantly larger in a 12 megapixel sensor because they're in that same space that we also put 61 million dots. So they're collecting more light and more information per pixel, why that camera delivers such incredible results in low light. But when we go to our higher resolution cameras, we're seeing the benefit of recording at 8K in some of these cameras because we have so much data. So that's a little bit of a factor of when we go into post that we can punch in and have a little bit more processing and editing capabilities. So while we talk about all of these sensors, we've gone to stack sensors in our Alpha 9 and Alpha 1 cameras. You've seen and heard of some of this in our Venice. These are going to be cameras that are capturing data much faster so that we don't run into that jello effect as often when you're moving the camera or our subject is swinging something that's extremely straight like a golf club or a staff or a lacrosse stick, that you can see that curvature. And then I'm sure many of you saw this because it caught the industry by storm, is last week Sony introduced the next generation of imaging sensors, that new technology in full frame, which is the world's first full frame global imaging sensor. And this is in the Alpha 9 III. Huge deal for stills, huge deal for video. We've seen global in some of our smaller 1-inch sensors. There are competitors in the market that have done it in APS-C. No one has done it in full frame to this point. So a global sensor in the Alpha 9 III is going to be unique in that it's capturing all the data simultaneously. So all of the CMOS sensors in the market have this rolling shutter effect, right? They're capturing data top to bottom or bottom to top. Nothing is capturing it simultaneously. It's not a piece of film. So because of that, it's extremely fast, but when you start putting that camera in motion, or if you've ever recorded out the subway or out of a bullet train, I say that because that's the examples the Japanese gave us, was they held the camera out of a bullet train window. You've seen the slantedness that you can get in buildings or straight lines or telephone poles because nothing's being captured simultaneously, and that's what's unique in the Alpha 9 III, is a global shutter. Everything is simultaneous. There is no side effects of distortion. For still images, we can finally truly see the bend in a golf club because no one knew if that bend was from the golfer or from the imaging sensor causing the distortion. So you have a lot of things that are extremely unique related to a global sensor. Now the side effects are massive in how fast it's capturing, that not only can I shoot at 4K 120 for video, but I can shoot that at stills. With autofocus, with auto exposure, I can shoot it in RAW. Okay, this doesn't exist in the world today, a week ago, before we announced it. So being able to do full real-time autofocus recognition, recognizing human bodies, subjects. If you get into the weeds, this could be animals, insects, planes, trains, automobiles. We have a variety of subject recognition that's occurring, all continuously at 120 frames per second. So this is, if you rip off a burst in that speed, that's 6 gigabytes of data per second. Now, not only can I do that, but I also can do it blackout free. There's no mirror opening and closing. There's no stutter or stop to the viewfinder view. And I'm getting full autofocus where this camera is recalculating what it sees at 120 times per second to shift that focus. So if we have a subject moving extremely fast, the camera is keeping up with their movements. So I can take an f1.2 lens that supports 120 frames per second and shoot stills and get almost every single framing focus. Now, what's incredible is we also have the ability to enter into a time machine. Pre-capture allows us to start capturing images when we start autofocusing. So if you push the shutter halfway, this is a feature we've seen in the video world. The FX9 has it. The FX6 received it by a firmware update so that when you hit record, your pre-roll goes back in time. This is the first time we've seen it for stills with full autofocus and full auto exposure, that as I'm focusing and hit the shutter, I can choose how far it goes back in time so that I can capture moments that you may not have seen before. So that I may have missed the picture, but I can go back and capture the moment those wings were unfurled. Now, I know people use this on the FX9. I hear about it all the time from like high-ranking government officials that we'll hit record as we see them, but we can get that moment the official walked out of the door of a room. Walked out because you can go back in time for video. So I hear that often. This is the first time we've seen it for stills and being possible. Now, it can shoot stills at 30, 60, or 120 frames a second, right? So if I'm shooting stills at 30 frames a second in a burst that has autofocus in RAW, I'm now essentially creating raw video to the memory card. Because I can take those still images and work with them after the fact. And I've gone back in time, so I have the pre-roll to it as well. So there's a lot of data here, a lot of information that can be worked in post. Just because it shoots 120 frames a second doesn't mean you need to be using that all the time. So I know people that are shooting at 30 frames a second to create video content, but still have the stills. And those videos are at 6K. You're at 24 megapixel. So you have a lot of data. Now, like I said, distortion free. Our camera is shooting 6K oversampled, so you're getting the sharpest video you can at 24 megapixel, not line skipped or pixel binning when we bring it back down to 4K. As well, this is our first alpha camera that when we enter 4K 120, is doing that without cropping. So it's not punching in. You know, sometimes we would see 1.1 or 1.01 or 1.05, a little bit of punch in. This is our first alpha camera that's able to do the full readout, no punching at all. Again, we're seeing these specs on a variety of the new generation. 10-bit, 422, all intra, right to the memory card. I can shoot that with all of our current generation cameras, 4K, 10-bit, all intra. The 16-bit raw output to like an Atomos or an external recording device. The only reason that asterisk there is Atomos did not get a heads up on the A9 III, so they're just going to do a little firmware update to know what the raw video out of that camera looks like. And of course, S-Log 3, this is the first Alpha 9 series camera. So taking a look back in time, Sony introduced the A9. It was a groundbreaking moment because it was the first stacked sensor full frame camera to allow us to shoot silently without compromise, so without the distortion when we went silent. But Sony held it back a little in that there was no S-Log or any picture profiles in the Alpha 9. So you couldn't really go and use it as a true video tool. Then the Alpha 9 Mark II came out, same thing, no picture profiles. In this camera, there is no restrictions. You have that global shutter with S-Log 3. You can use it, do whatever you want with the footage. The base ISO is 2000 in this camera for S-Log 3. That varies. Some of our cameras are down at 800. We'll talk about that a little more. And of course, it has S-Cinetone. So it has that picture profile that we've derived from the Venice we'll jump into. And then where it says dynamic active mode stabilization, that is our most aggressive form of image stabilization that's in the cameras now. So you're getting 8 stops of stabilization handheld with a Sony lens. And I'll show some examples as we go on. Again, I mentioned this before, autofocus is incredible. It's calculated 120 times per second. But this is the first time in the Alpha 9 or the Alpha 1 in our highest end camera we've seen the dedicated AI processing chip. So Sony has added a piece of memory or a processor right onto the main board that's handling that autofocus. It's doing human pose estimation. So we've done a great job of tracking faces and eyes in the past, but what's new is that we're not just looking for the face. We can recognize a human from behind, from the front, with a face mask on, with anything that's blocking the eyes, because we're actually able to see a human pose estimation and determine that's the back of the head, that's the front of the head. Now we see the eye, where the camera is keeping up at extremely fast rates. We've seen this chip in some of our other Alpha cameras, but because the Alpha 9 III is feeding that piece so much information at 120 times per second, we're seeing a significant advantage with this camera. Now, a lot of our video cameras like FX6, FX9, again, have had face detection or real-time autofocus where we're tracking incredible stuff for interviews, incredible stuff for using people, especially with shallow depth of field. You know, this is a tool that works at f1.4. It works at f1.2. It'll follow subjects around the frame. It eliminates that need to sort of be manually rack focusing and going in and out. It's very reliable. Now, on many of our cameras, we quote this, and these are always in the S-Log 3, but the wide dynamic range, right? So we have incredible pieces of information. The file that you get delivered at base ISO from shadows to highlights delivers remarkable range. Most of our cameras in the modern generation are delivering over 15 stops of range. That's a ton of information. I don't know if most people don't even test that or quote that on the smaller sensor cameras. You'll never really see it on the 1-inch or the APS-C or the camcorders. It's a huge factor of being full frame. And then your flexibility in editing with the S-Log, if any of you have worked with those files, it's incredible. So low light, we talked about this. These high ISOs, when we look at like an Alpha 7S III or an FX3, being able to hit these ISOs that are unheard of, right? Talking about like 100,000. Even putting that number 409 on the screen, it like gives me the chills, because like who would ever use that, right? Who would ever dial in to something that outrageous? But the idea is that you can go to 25.6, 12.8, you know, you could push 51,600, you could push 50, these huge numbers and not have to worry that you're gonna like be unusable in the output, right? Many of you have seen this. A lot of people shoot in low light. They've adopted into some of these cameras in particular because of what they can do in low light. And unless you're shooting at f8, f11 in low light, you're likely not hitting some of these numbers, right? If you're shooting at 2.8, f4, or shallower, you're likely hovering in like the 10,000 range, 12, 25, 6. And the files that it delivers in S-Log3 are incredible. And if when you click in editing to remove noise now in Premiere or Final Cut, it's like cheating, right? It really is. It delivers stuff that you're like, how does it hold up the details so well? 4K 120 is a huge deal because we're not seeing that overheating anymore. Sony has redeveloped some of the active cooling in the FX3 so you can shoot this for a long period of time. One of the specs in the Alpha 9 III is that we can do 4K 120 longer than previous generations in the all-intra format. And again, our cameras like the A7S III, Alpha 1, A7R5, A9 III that can do 4K 120 also can do 1080 240. So when you really need to see what happened, super slow speeds, you have that ability. Again, all of this at shallow depth of field. Now this feature is not in every camera, but it is in some of the newer ones that we've introduced, and it's incredible. So if you're a one-man band, you're out there shooting some interviews, or you're shooting yourself, you're the filmmaker. We have the ability with our human pose estimation and tracking humans to this is what's being recorded, this is what the camera sees, in the box is what's being recorded. So we are floating a frame around to give you the appearance of camera movements. We call this auto framing. You have adjustments in the camera of the crop level of how tight on the subject you want it to be. And you'll see that as the subject moves around, forward, backward, side to side, all of that information is what's actually recorded. So I'll play that again. Really cool if you're working by yourself or you want to have one camera, you're working on a prime, and the camera appears to be zooming or tracking. This is in 4K, but it's floating the frame. To me, that's just amazing stuff, right? Like, it's just next generation technology, right? You used to be jerky. You used to have to be buying these, like, I don't even want to get into the price point of some of the heads that you guys put on these tripods just to get a smooth look like that. It's amazing that the camera can do it. So it can be an auto start thing. It can be set where you tap it, it starts. It can wait 15 seconds and go in and out every 15 seconds so that it looks intentional. It looks like you have someone operating a camera right there. So there's a variety of settings in there that you get control. So you can change every 15 or 30-second intervals where it's just punching in and out. No one's sitting there counting, but it looks like you have a camera operator that's following you as you're doing this whole interview piece or walk-around head stuff. It's amazing, especially if you're doing like live streaming or even in here today, it could be following me going back and forth as we live stream. I threw this in here because it is important, right? All of our cameras have the ability to color match so that we can get them as close as possible. Anything that you want to spend up to the Venice, Venice 2, Burano, have the same picture profiles that you will find in, I'm trying to think in my head how low the price point goes, but Sony's crop sensor, interchangeable lens cameras, sub $1,000 cameras, all have this same picture profile, right? So I can shoot full frame with one, have a handheld with something else, have time code synced, depending on the camera, and all of them are going to give me 10-bit 422 delivered color with S-Log3. S-Cine Gamut, so being able to go to S-Cinetone is also huge because we had so many requests following the Venice to bring this picture profile to the masses. To be able to have this profile that handles the roll-off of the highlights and the shadows really nicely, skin tone colors, so it's out of the box. You're not doing any grading to the S-Cinetone profile. As you shoot it, it's a beautiful look, great for live streaming. My live stream camera on my desk at home is set to it, but I'm sure no one notices over Zoom at all. But it makes me feel better about the whole thing. It makes me feel like I did something professional in my look. That's why I have a 3514 for Zoom. Excuse me. So like I said, the wide dynamic range is through S-Log. We're going to be able to get raw video out through external recording devices. We don't have that internally to the memory cards, but whether it's an Atomos or any device that can go out of the HDMI, our current generation of cameras have a full-size HDMI on the side. So if you've worked with the ones in the past that had that micro HDMI and wanted to shoot yourself at like that little cord and try to put it in there and then it would not be right, full size on everything now, which is super nice. Everyone's got those like cords pouring out of their drawers. And we've also got some HLG production in there so that you could get faster production to HDR stuff, and I don't think I put it in here, but in terms of file compression, we do have the all-intra frame rate. We've also got some more aggressive compressions to have the HS in there if you've worked with the HS. Now I'm just throwing my head because I don't have a slide on there. But there's more aggressive compressions to give you results that are not sacrificing any color range, dynamic range, or low light ability while still unpacking that file very quickly. So I've talked about a few cameras that shoot 8K. A7R5 is a consumer camera that does it. We have the Alpha 1. We now have the Burano. I didn't include the exact crops of the Burano because there's so many different form factors you can shoot. But the idea is that even from 8K to 4K, full frame, not really sacrificing anything. I did say in the A1 it's now full frame without any crop. You can see the red line is the slight crop that you do get in 4K 120 there, but it's so minimal. But being able to take a consumer camera, shoot 8K, have it in post so that, you know, okay, now I can take my 4K verticals that I need for the stupid social media stuff and then deliver them out of this file because, you know, I need to have verticals now. It's like unacceptable if I don't have vertical video at the same time. And you still have the file to work with in post and sort of float it around. So we're seeing a lot of demand for 8K, much more than I ever expected, because in my head, sitting down to edit an 8K file just sounds like overwhelming. I personally get scared hitting the record button and having to edit anything, but working with bigger and bigger files just means more processing power, more hard drives, more computers, and everything on the back end. But it's that ability that you can shoot it 4K, the 8K is oversampled, it's beautiful results. And if you look, the Burano's doing very similar stuff as we talk about. You're just getting more crops because you can go down to DCI frame crops. You can get it a little narrower. So there's a little bit more options, especially with the anamorphic unpacking in that camera. So except for the Burano of what we were talking about, most of our current gen, including FX6, is using this setup. 2 card slots. The Burano uses CF Express Type B. These are CF Express Type A. So these are a smaller form factor. We still take SD cards, okay? SD cards go in backwards. These CF Express go in forwards. The same slot can take either memory card type. So it's very nice and flexible in that sense. These newer cards are writing at 700 megabits a second, where SD has topped out at 300. There won't be any achievements beyond that in SD. That's UHS, the top cards, the V90, the fastest ones, 300 megabits a second write, or 299 as Sony quotes them. So now we're at 700 in these smaller cards. So it's much faster to clear the buffer or to write that stuff out. The only limitation in our cameras is that we require the faster cards for 4K 120 all intra. So if you're not in all intra, you can shoot to SD cards. You can shoot 8K to SD cards. It's the 4K 120 and 1080 240 all I that require these faster cards. I have 160s on the screen. Sony now makes them up to 2 terabytes. They're going to cost you a mortgage payment. But they're really nice to have those big cards. And 2 slots allow us a lot of flexibility. Sony gives you the ability to do almost anything you can think of with 2 slots. So I can write to one and have it roll over to the next if I fill one. I can simultaneously write to both. And I could also do my file and then a proxy to the other. So I can be writing to one, have the proxy smaller file go to the other, hand the proxy off, let someone edit it, then deliver the bigger files later so that they've got everything to work off of. The alpha cameras as well will create proxies for video now. So it's really nice that you can work with like shooting 4K 120 and still create a proxy so that you're not editing off of those massive files. I mentioned FX3, active cooling, has the fan in it. You know, that's where we first start with that into the FX6 and everything on up. We have a very interesting heat structure in these cameras to really push that heat out and away from the imaging sensor and away from the card slots where the heat doesn't need to build up. Of course, there's limitations, right? You can only go so far with that, and every environment you shoot in is different, and how much sun is hitting the camera, and if you pull the screen out. All of our cameras now do have a high heat threshold for the auto power off temperature, so that they don't shut down immediately when they think they're hot. And it does work well. It really just depends on how long you need to go and in what environment. And some of that will then lead to which camera is the right camera for you, right? Like if I'm shooting 4K 120, clip after clip after clip after clip after clip, or I need to go for 30 minutes straight, I probably need to look at something more than a small camera because I'm trying to push the camera to do more than it's capable of. One thing a lot of people don't realize is our hot shoe. So the hot shoe on our camera, the same shoe you find on an FX6, FX9, there is one hidden on the Burano under a little plate with screws. This shoe is not just a hot shoe for flashes. We call it the MI shoe, multi-interface. There's some extra pins up in the front that allow you to put extra pieces up there. So we have communication for audio, which is really the best thing. Sony makes a ton of mics that natively go right on there for digital audio connection. And it is a digital to digital audio interface. So we can get 24-bit 4-channel audio through that shoe. The piece that's on there, the most current model would be called the XLR K3M. That gives you 2 XLR inputs right through the shoe. So you can tap into any mic system you're using. You can tap into a soundboard with any of these cameras and have it all synced up really well. It does come with a wire as well, so that if you had a cage or a rig, this can get off camera. It comes with like a little 10-inch wire, so you're not locked into putting it on the shoe. But it's one of those pieces that a lot of people are unaware exists in our lineup and in our system, and it gives you so much flexibility with these small cameras. Now that same thing is where we can put our UWP wireless mic system. If you've ever used that, we make a hot shoe adapter so that those wireless mics can go right on there. The same adapter is what you'd use on an FX6 to put it right on the top of the camera on the handle. So it's the same connection for the two. Image stabilization. This is huge. This allows us to carry the camera without a gimbal or just to do quick clips, handheld. So camera and body and lens combined, we can achieve 8 stops of stabilization because we have sensor-based stabilization and some of our lenses have stabilization. Now, which direction are we stabilizing? If we look at the Burano, we can see that we're getting pitch, yaw, and roll when we put a PL mount on there. So I put this up there so you can see 3-axis stabilization with a PL mount lens, 5-axis stabilization with a Sony E-mount lens because of the information that lens has and it's already stabilized. But this is the first time ever we've seen stabilization for a PL mount lens from anyone. Because of our sensor-based stabilization, we can put, now I say PL, but you could take any third party you can think of. You can take a Canon lens, you can take a Fuji lens, you can take some knockoff Chinese brand, and you can put it on there, and because of the sensor-based stabilization, you're still gonna get that stabilization of the image. Now, Sony hypes this up and talks about it, but let's be honest. Have you guys seen the Burano downstairs? How many people are walking around with that thing in their hand? It's not gonna be what we see. What I think is that it's a much bigger deal on some of these cameras, and FX6 and FX3, is how well it works. And how there's different options in the camera of how aggressive you want it to be. But with a Sony lens, the camera is actually, let's say you turn the stabilization off so you're not getting it. With a Sony lens, it is recording the gyroscope data to a file that is sidecar file. And you can actually use Catalyst Browse, Sony software, or the plugin for Premiere, and stabilize in post. Because it has that gyro data, it's gonna crop a little into your file in post, but it's using that data to do post-processing stabilization. So Cinemaline, I've touched on so many of these cameras, but I wanna make sure we talk a little bit about the hottest piece in the industry right now. This is the first time it's been shown publicly in the DC area, is at this show. I haven't really had my hands on it too much. And this is a feature we see in the FX6 and FX9 and now in the Burano, and it is something people ask about in every camera we make. Will it ever be? No, it's a huge part, but to exist in an alpha camera would be amazing. But being able to have the electronic variable ND built into the camera for seamless transitions from shadows to highlights is such a huge deal. Anyone that puts their camera in motion...
Alternatively, you can use Auto ND to seamlessly control the depth of field within one shot, something that has not been possible before. Manually control the iris ring on the lens to close or open the iris. The electronic variable ND filter takes care of exposure, and only the depth of field will change. Thanks to the seamless control of both the electronic variable ND filter and iris adjustment, the camera can produce creative effects that were simply impossible before. Alternatively,
So, I mean, that goes without saying, right? This is stuff that wasn't possible. To be able to shoot an f1.4 lens in bright sunlight and walk to a shadow, a garage, walk in and out of a garage without having a huge jumper go bright all of a sudden is incredible, right? Without having to screw an ND onto the front of the lens and try and do a variable as you walk, without degrading quality because of the filter, having this built in is something special. And this is Sony technology. They're using an electronic variable ND with a current, that electronic current that runs through that ND filter. Now that brings us, this slide is tough to talk about because I've tried not to be too particular to particular cameras besides A9 III throughout. And every camera has a different range, different dynamic range, right? But the idea here is that we have either dual base ISO or dual gain ISO in some of our cameras. And dual base is a huge deal because we're going to get the exact same high noise performance at 800 and 3200 in the Burano. The exact same dynamic range performance in how many stops above and below in our shadows and highlights that we're going to see. And this is unique technology because a lot of people look at some of our other cameras and think they are dual base. That term gets thrown out a lot. And they are dual gain, right? So the noise performance isn't the same, but it is, let's say, for example, we have a camera that is dual gain and we get great performance at 100 at the base ISO. We may see something change at 500 ISO where it's still really good and reduces noise. Those are dual gain, right? So we're seeing that, but this is a true dual base where we have no difference between 800 and 3200. And these bases are always, when Sony quotes these for video, it's always the S-Log3 base, right? Where we can see in that, not without a picture profile. And of course has an effect on anamorphic dark environments, being able to have that same exact noise performance. We've discussed this. PL mount, huge. I like to put it up there because when you buy the camera, if you buy the camera, when you unbox a Burano, it actually comes with a PL mount attached to it. So it is natively there. 6 screws come out and you have the E-mount for any of Sony's lenses. We've done made a huge effort to expand this lens lineup. So there are some older lenses that are in there. There's some newer lenses that are in there. There's some power zoom lenses. So these are great for video. This one is very common. Many of you have either seen the 28-135 or in the past worked with the 18-110, the APS-C version on like an FS5 or FS7. We've seen that around the industry for some time. The 28-135 is the full frame. We also have a full frame 1635 f4 that's newer so that we can use those zoom rockers, get smooth transitions in the zoom. But at the same time, Sony has worked tirelessly to go with all new primes. Our primes are remarkable from 14 to 600 millimeters. We have a series of primes. Excuse me. And the lens lineup continues to grow. So this is an APS-C, great for the FX30. FX30 is the exact same chassis as an FX3 with a crop sensor, so an affordable way to get into the cinema line. And this one we have downstairs. Sony doesn't show it too often. Our 1635 f4 Cine. So it has an external servo motor geared to be able to zoom, or geared to be able to handle zoom and focus manually, extremely slowly, and transition really nicely. And when we put this number up there, I know this is being streamed. Japan did not like this number last week. It includes some of our lens adapters for the A-mount to this, which apparently aren't included in the 75. So if you want to debate 75 or 73, that's where we're at right now. But Sony is never stopping. You know, the lenses just keep coming out. If you look at our lens lineup, I think we have over 5 different 50 millimeters. Sony has this obsession with putting out 50 millimeter lenses. There's 2.14s, there's a 1.2, there's a 2.5, there's a 2.8 macro, and that's 5 of them right there. So this just continues to grow, the full frame lenses, and the benefit is these deliver that smooth, beautiful autofocus that we see with any of these newer cameras. So to be able to get that, you're not gonna see that in any of the PL mount lenses, right? You're gonna get the unique look of that lens, or you'll get the benefit of an anamorphic lens, or you'll get the benefit of these cinema slow transition manual focus lenses that have these crazy out of focus looks that they've done on purpose. But you're not gonna get some of the benefits to the transition of autofocus, some of the stabilization benefits, and some of it's just exploring the lineup of what's the right lens for you. So I've been going and going. I'd love to answer questions if there's anything that I missed on, and if I don't know, it's because I only know a little bit about a lot. So I'm trying to cover that lot today. But please, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you guys for listening to me today. And it's a lot of information packed quickly. So if there's anything I can cover, please let me know. I don't get to hit escape. And we do have a bunch of this stuff downstairs, including the Alpha 9 3.